Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I made it out to see my family last weekend in St. Louis. It was the first time in 6 years. And good conversations, good time, lots of catching up. It does turn out that either I've gotten taller in the past 6 years or my mom has shrunk appreciably. But since I'm 52 and she's 83, I'm thinking it's the latter. You never know, but it was a good trip. Mainly just consisted of going over to my brother's house and sitting around and gabbing with him and his wife and their youngest daughter and my mom. And that was fine by me. No, no need to see anything. We were just there to see family. I can't really tell you too much of what we talked about because it is family, and I don't know you that well, if at all. But it made up a little for all the sparse phone conversations of the last half decade or so. And I should be going back out there in August for my niece's bat mitzvah. That was a shock, I'll say, not seeing her between the ages of 6 and 12. I think she more than made up for the 4 to 5 inches that my mom shrank, as she's now taller than her mom and soon to be taller than my wife. But it was, it was a good weekend. Now, this week, I am heading down to D.C. for some lobbying meetings about drug shortages, national security, and domestic pharma manufacturing initiatives. I hate to say that I'm some sort of expert on that confluence of topics, but it turns out not a lot of other people know as much as I do in that space, so I guess I grew into being qualified. We'll put it that way. Another thing I have grown into becoming qualified for is hosting live panels with cartoonists. And that brings us to this week's show. My guest this time is Noah Van Sciver. Noah and I recorded a remote session last year when he had 2 new books out, which we'll mention. But this time around, we talked live at the MoCA Festival in New York City for comics and cartooning. That was April 2nd, 2023, for you time travelers out there. It was part of their Artist Spotlight series, and festival organizer Bill Cardelopoulos, another past guest of the show, asked me if I'd moderate the conversation with Noah. I signed on and then discovered that the weekend was also going to include a panel with Neil Gaiman and Colleen Doran, and just hoped to gosh, till the schedule finally came out, that we would not be set opposite them, in which case our panel would probably just be me and Noah sitting by ourselves in a hall. Luckily, we went on 90 minutes or so before that SRO panel. I had a nice turnout with about 2 or 3 dozen people, one of whom, my pal Summer Pierre, live sketched the panel, and another of whom, one of my postcard correspondents, Liz York, just sent me a card with a pen and marker drawing of me and Noah gabbing during the panel. I love having artistic pals, and it's always nice that, those guys see those things in the moment and are able to draw where I'm, all stuck in my own head and such. Anyway, Noah is a great cartoonist and quite worthy of the spotlight session. His bio is going to speak to a lot of his accomplishments, but I do want to highlight his most recent work, and that's a comic book called Maple Terrace from Uncivilized Books. It's going to be a mini-series of autobiographical comics from Noah's childhood. The first issue's out now, and it forms a really nice complement to his graphic novella, One Dirty Tree, which I finally got around to reading as prep for this session. One Dirty Tree is, it's a very autobiographical novella and centers on that same home and that upbringing, which was very distinct and weird. Anyway, I also revisited Noah's hysterically funny series of graphic novels about a very self-important writer, the Fonte Bukowski books, and they're a hoot. One of the questions we get during the session from the audience is whether Noah actually has a time machine and was able to go back and dissect this particular audience member to create Fonte Bukowski from decades earlier. But anyway, it's a universal character, as Noah's going to talk about. Now, he was on last year around the time that his two full-length books, As a Cartoonist and Joseph Smith and the Mormons, came out. I highly recommend both of those. And they're very different books, but weirdly complementary, and it's a weird coincidence they came out on the same day from two different publishers. But Joseph Smith and the Mormons, which we'll talk about during this live panel, is a biography of Joseph Smith. And, well, anyway, we'll get into all that. Noah is a thoughtful, engaged artist and storyteller, and I was glad to get the opportunity to finally record with him face-to-face, even if it meant that people were going to arrive in the middle of the session, make all sorts of noise, clattering through the hall, getting to their seats. Not a ton of them, and they're done pretty early, within the first 10 minutes or so, but that's a caveat. The other one is that some of the audience questions weren't picked up too well by the mics I had set up because they were facing me and Noah at the table. So I recite those. A few of them I try to jack up the volume, and I hope that works out okay also. You'll be the judge. And here's Noah's bio. Noah Van Sciver is widely considered one of the most notable cartoonists of his generation, and first came to national attention in 2006 with his critically acclaimed anthology comic book series Blammo, which earned him 3 Ignatz Award nominations. His work has appeared in Mad Magazine, The Comics Journal, Best American Comics, and The Stranger, as well as numerous anthologies. He is the author of multiple critically acclaimed graphic novels, including The Hypo, The Melancholic Young Lincoln, Youth is Wasted, Sankoul, One Dirty Tree, Fonte Bukowski, As a Cartoonist, and Joseph Smith and the Mormons. He lives in Columbia, South Carolina. His latest comic book is Maple Terrace. And now, the 2023 Virtual Memories Conversation with Noah Van Sciver, live from Mocha Fest. So, it's an artist spotlight. You've had a lengthy career by my standards. I thought we'd jump to the very end, or where you are now. You've got a new book out, or a new comic series out called Maple Terrace. And your work has spanned autobio, fiction, historical fiction, satire. Tell me about returning to autobiography at this stage and where you are.
I just needed something that was going to be a little more light to work on after doing Joseph Smith and the Mormons. I wanted to jump into just doing something that was going to be like just fun, and not taxing in any way. So it's like Maple Terrace is like one of my sketchbook comics. Like it's all drawn in a sketchbook, and it's just about taking it easy, basically, and seeing like what comes out of my head about my childhood and stuff. Just in making fun of that, goofing on that. So
yeah, how has autobiography changed for you over the course of making strips that are about your childhood, about life as a cartoonist, that are semi-fictionalized and more?
How's it changed for me?
Yeah, what's the process like of telling a story from life, and how have you learned what doesn't need to be there?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer because I don't know. That's like the mystery of making comics. I don't put too much thought into it. I think I'm really good about trusting myself when I'm telling a story, because I know that if I insert something in one panel and I don't know why I did that eventually I'm going to realize why I did that. That like it's this, it's like this process that's happening that I'm not even really aware of. So when I'm telling any kind of story, like autobiographical or whatever, it's like what elements do I include in that story from my life? I don't consciously like think of it. It's just like, oh, that's why I talked about that or something. Like it's just like putting down elements that are going to be useful for me later. So.
And how do you contrast that with, say, a historical work like the life of Joseph Smith?
Yeah, well, there's some of that that process in there where it's with Joseph Smith, when you're doing a historic graphic novel, you're going through everything in history and cherry picking what you think is going to be important in order to tell the story that you're just trying to tell, So I really did have to like pick and choose what I felt like were important to tell the story of, just as simplified as I possibly could. And the book, of course, wound up being like 200 pages longer than it was supposed to be. It was just like there's a lot of stuff in there that I just couldn't, I wound up realizing wouldn't fit in there, wouldn't benefit the story to have in there. But that excited me when I learned about them, And so.
Can you speak a little on, it's something we talked about a year ago when we talked, we talked way too much about the book. When we talked a year ago, we didn't talk enough about as a cartoonist, but your relationship with Joseph Smith and the church and sort of how that evolved over the course of making the book.
Yeah, well, he was a painting on a wall to me as a child. I didn't really know anything about him. I was told he was a prophet. In the church, it's like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they really talk more about Joseph Smith than they do about Jesus.
Yeah.
So he's sort of this figure, So I just basically took him down off the wall and studied who the real person was, and I came to my own conclusions about why things happened the way they did. I tried as best I could not to include a lot of my own opinions about things as I was working on them. Super, like, maybe openly, but maybe there's some of that in there.
Yeah, did you see some of those things creeping in, or try to figure out how to edit them out?
And it's also very difficult to just tell like a straight story that's like historic and serious for too long, because then you just like, if you also work in humor, it's like such a great relief, to just be like, all right, let me just insert something a little funny here, let the air out of this tire or something.
Knowing that the book went 200 pages longer than you thought, was there more? Even beyond that, was there a lot more that you figure?
I cut out 100 pages of that book, and then, the pages that are fully drawn.
Because Abrams was against it?
No. Okay. It's my own self-editing process, because the thing was, I dove into that story not even really knowing what the full story was in detail. I just had, like a list. This happened, and then basically you're just learning about each of those things from your list and connecting them to each other. And so I was learning as I was drawing, and so it was a real process of like editing myself, cutting out all this stuff that I thought was going to be so cool, and then I realized like this is just a waste of space, especially if I'm already running out of space.
What do you feel, as a cartoonist in particular, you learned in the process of that book?
For the most part, pacing was the thing. That book was a school of pacing and storytelling for me. Mm-hmm. And like the rhythm of telling a long form story, which is something that's not easy. You really do have to learn. Everybody has to learn their own way, it seems like, on how to do that. Like what the right rhythm of your comic is going to be. They're all different, Like I know Chris Ware, for example, if he wants a reader to pause for a moment on a page, he'll do the drawing a little more detailed, so that the reader, and the intention is that like you read this stuff quick, and then he's manipulating you to stop for a second on this, because he's thinking about like how much time the reader is going to spend on this story, So I did a lot of that kind of stuff, and one of my main tools for doing that was the full page landscape drawing. It was just like, I've given you so much information, let's pull back a little bit and remind you of like where this world that they're in and what their surroundings look like and things like that, just to make sure that you really feel like this is a real time and place,
Mm-hmm.
Doing those full page drawings, did you like feel where they were while you were progressing, or did you go back and see like, oh, it needs to be there?
No, it was as I was working on it, because I'd be reading and rereading it and thinking like, does this flow right? And then a lot of times you'd be like, you really need something here. And so I didn't insert those pages afterwards. It was like as I was telling the story to myself, basically, because that's what I was doing with that book. Like I was telling myself this history, and And so during the process of that, I'd be like, well, I really am cramming a lot of stuff right here. Let me try and slow it down a little bit, you know.
Do you see yourself deploying things you've learned in the process of that, or is it still it's sort of the over question of the book's been out for almost a year? You know, how do you look at it in with a little time and a little space now?
I have to put my humility aside for a question like that, because to me it's like there's no other book like that. Like, I am so proud of that graphic novel that I feel like I really did something that nobody else has done. Like to me it's like this real work of art. Like, that's what I think about when I'm like late at night and I'm just thinking to myself, and I can just build up my ego.
I made this. Yeah, I'll tell you, I hadn't seen it in print until now. I had a PDF that I worked from when we recorded, and I forgot to follow up with Abrams to get a hard copy.
Yeah.
And seeing it down in the exhibit floor and bringing it up, I'm like, it's really substantial
meaty
and meaningful.
Yeah, and it'll take you a long time to get through. Like, it's dense. It's the most beautiful artwork I've ever done. I mean, to me, it's like, I remember the first time I ever did a comic book. I published Blammo #1, self-published it, and when I got it, I felt the same way. I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. Like, I can't believe I was so proud that I had achieved that. And back then, I remember people asking me, like, are you going to do a graphic novel? Like, could you do a story that's 100 pages? And I'm like, no way. I can never do that. So it's like the challenge, the personal challenge and things like, it's like if I were to walk the, like, Appalachian Trail or something, I would be so proud of myself that I did that. And to me, like, that's what this book is. Like, it was such like an endurance test. And
I don't want to say taking a break, but the change of pace in terms of moving to Maple Terrace and
it needed to happen. I just needed to take a little humor vacation or something.
Well, when we spoke last year, it was you contended you were between ideas. This is the most quiet period you had working. Still holding up, or are you engaged in
I'm just
a bigger project at this point?
I'm just coming out of that, but I did take basically a year break from doing anything serious, like really working on a next big graphic novel. I just focused on illustration work or smaller books and things like that. I didn't, so right now I'm thinking a lot more about like what I want to do, what my next big graphic novel will be.
So the quote I want to use, when we spoke last year, you said the following: I'm very fortunate. I'm somebody who's living on the other side of his dreams. Everything that I dreamed about when I was a young man, I've already done it. Now I'm taking it easy and trying to figure out what my next dream should be. Yeah. So we're in that dreaming mode?
I still feel like that. Like I had such lofty dreams for myself when I was starting out in comics. Like I had all my heroes, and I took comics very seriously, and I had all these things I wanted to achieve, and I worked hard, and I did start to achieve them all, and I feel like I am not in that mind state anymore. But like I remember being at a talk with Art Spiegelman and Francois Mouly in 2008 in Boulder, Colorado, for the Breakdowns collection. And I was in that auditorium, like watching art on the stage, and then I looked, and I was sitting right behind Francois Mouly. And I had brought one of my comic books with me, and I was like shaking, trying to hold myself back from tapping on her shoulder and like dropping her this comic, And that was 2008, and like then now like I know those people, and like all the cartoonists that I looked up as heroes back then, I know now, and to me like it really does feel like I'm on the other side of a dream that I had in my 20s.
Being peers with that said, it's just got to be amazing.
And I just feel like. Just so lucky that I was able to actually do that, I don't know.
Life takes us in funny directions, but if you work, the thing I want to ask, with One Dirty Tree, which, again, autobiographical novella, mainly about your childhood, but also about turning 30, you're about a year or so from turning 40. So,
thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, I feel bad. 52, so I can throw that at you. What does it look like, with a 10-year gap? And what does closing on 40 look like compared to closing on 30 for a cartoonist?
Well, I'm settled. When I was turning 30, I remember freaking out about it because I didn't have anything together. I had basically pushed all of like the foundational responsibility, like all the, building a foundation for my future. I just didn't even think about that stuff at all. I was just like working at a deli and then drawing comics at night, and that was my entire life. And I didn't have any money, and I just was full of anxiety about everything. And that was so that was me at 29. But I feel like now I don't feel that kind of stuff at all anymore. I just
no anxiety.
I have anxiety, but for things about getting older, like health stuff or something. I guess that's what happens next. But like, I don't feel, as far as like my career goes or whatever. Like, I don't have any anxiety about it. I just yeah.
Do you remember when you realized you were alt and not mainstream as a cartoonist?
That's a good question. I never realized it. That's just the way that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it just was a natural flow of who you were, because you're reading all these mainstream comics growing up, and you're, the whole family cartooning world that you relay in Maple Terrace is, focused around that sort of Marvel. Yeah,
well, that was all anybody. World. This is in the early '90s, and that's all anybody in my neighborhood were into. Were Marvel comics. Image Comics was like really big at the time. And all the kids in my neighborhood, like, it was such a tight group, and it was all about like whatever the latest issue of Spawn was or something. That's what we talked about. Yeah. Like, did you read that? That's what it was, trading comics and stuff like that. So, but whenever I tried to make my own art, it just never. It's like the line that came out of my pen was alternative.
Because you didn't have all the extra little lines that McFarlane was putting in all over.
That's right. I still can't draw like an 8-pack of abs.
It's a great line in Maple Terrace in a conversation you have with your dad as an 8-year-old, trying to go through his comics versus your Spawn fixation, where he says, "Todd McFarlane is for boys, son. Barry Windsor Smith is for men." I have to say, great wisdom from a father in that case. No comics background, and things are much more shady. But
Barry Windsor Smith was his favorite artist, still is. Yeah. All the Conans and stuff, and he's obsessed with that. So that's true. He wasn't into what the kids were reading. He was into that stuff. And when my oldest sister was born, my dad was reading an issue of Conan in the hospital, and he named her after one of the female characters that was in that comic.
Not Sonia, luckily?
No, Jenna was like some character or something. So like that's how she got her name. My mom didn't even know that until like years later. So when my son was born, I brought that same comic book to the...
hoping to find something. Crom, my child. Yeah. Bad Conan joke, sorry. What did you have to learn as a cartoonist? I mean, you talk about pacing with this book.
Yeah.
What were the sort of major lessons beyond the work ethic aspect of it?
Yeah, well, color theory, like having some kind of sense of color, because I took a drawing and a painting class at a community college, and that was one of the things that the teacher had that he was really upset with me and my work about, was that I didn't know how to use color. Like, he just said I was basically colorblind, so that was a big thing to stumble over. And but I'm still learning. I'm still learning all the time. I'm still actively trying to get better. And I still see improvements. Like when I was working on this book, I had to go back and redraw a lot of the beginning of the book because my drawing had changed. My style had changed. Probably not enough that like the reader would notice, but that I would have noticed, and it would have bothered me.
How so?
It was a little simpler. I think when I dove into it, I didn't think of. I was like, well, I'm going to do it kind of loose, and just like in a quick, simple style. But then as I got into it, like I started to enjoy the drawing part of it so much more. That I started like adding more detail into it, and then when I look back at the earlier pages I did, I was like, this does not work together anymore. You
could see that with some cartoonists or just anyone working on a longer project, that the early stuff is figuring out what the style is.
Seth, famously with Clyde fans.
Gosh, and he had to go back to that and stick with it for the later ones, and it's how's the reception been to the Joseph Smith book? Have you heard anything from?
I hear mostly good things.
Yeah,
like a lot of ex-church members are the ones who really love it.
Okay.
So a lot of I've gotten a lot of emails from women who were in the church and they're no longer in the church, and they really seem to appreciate it. I made sure that I focused a lot on Emma, Joseph Smith's wife, when I told that story, because In a lot of like Mormon literature, they don't, or Mormon books, they don't do that. They don't cover that character really. They just kind of like make it seem like she was just so proud and blessed to be his wife. But then like more realistic accounts would be like, imagine what this was like for somebody in that era, who marries somebody who suddenly is like, I'm a prophet of God, and built a religion around them, and what that would actually cost. And then when he starts marrying other women and stuff, like what that would be like. So, and then that's some of the reasons that people that are in the church, really faithful, don't like about it, is that I touched on that. So, I don't know.
But no death threat sort of response or anything weird?
No, they're peaceful people.
Do you see, given that they came out around the same time, Joseph Smith and as a cartoonist, do you see them as compliments to each other? Or meta compliments to where you were in that moment?
I've heard that before, but I think it's just because I often in my autobiography stuff, I touch on the fact that I was raised in this church, so I guess so, but I wasn't really planning that at all, so.
But putting out 2 books in a year is always, or 2 books a day, as you did with this one, it's a positive. You mentioned trying to get better and always looking to improve. Are you seeing, do you look for other cartoonists, other fine artists? Where do you see the most influence or inspiration coming from nowadays?
That changes all the time, because I it's like when somebody gives me a book and they're like, you got to read this. I'll never read it because I have 100%. To be, I'm like, I have to be like struck by some kind of weird muse that gets me like obsessed with somebody, with like an artist or something. And I never know why that is, but that's another thing where it's like it's like somebody knows like he needs this kind of inspiration right now, and then all of a sudden I'm like obsessed. Like, of course, like Al Jaffe's birthday just happened, so I started like getting his little paperbacks, and just like reading all of that stuff. And I read his biography, and so it's just like it just happens. Like all of a sudden, I'm like, yes, like that's what I want. Kind of like when you're hungry for some kind of when you're hungry for pizza all of a sudden or something.
Yeah. Again, guys, chirp up questions. I know Summer's got.
I know you're the primary caregiver with your son. Mm-hmm. How do you get work done?
I steal time. That's what it feels like. If he's asleep or something, I'll try and get something done. Or if I can distract him enough, then I'll just bring a page out on the table, on the kitchen table, while he's playing with a car or something, and see what I can get done. You never know how long 30 minutes is until you have a kid and that's all you have. then you use it so wisely. Like I'm not like scrolling through Facebook or anything. I'm just like, I gotta, somehow magically I've been able to do it.
Follow-up question to that. Do you find, since having a kid, that your perspective of just like autobiography has deepened or changed?
What's changed is that like I'm now aware that all of the autobiography that I do, my son is going to read someday, and that's how he's going to get to know who his father was. That's something I never really thought about before. So I'm just more aware of that now, and I try and write. Like for example, Maple Terrace. Like the entire time I was working on that, I'm like, this is really for him to see and laugh about and stuff, because our upbringings are so different, and that's a weird thing about becoming a father is that you, for a second there, when you have a kid, you think like, oh, this is me. Like it's me living my life all over again. And then you have to stop that and realize that like, this is not you. This is another human being that you're responsible for. And you have to try and give them a better childhood than you had, which is
not a high bar based on your depictions of your childhood.
It's pretty easy to do that. And I take a lot of pride in that. And I take a lot of pride in that fact that I'm a working cartoonist and that I'm taking care of my family from my drawings. That's very important to me. So,
this is kind of a difficult question to formulate. I was thinking, like, as I said, your father read comics, and in the world where comics are not that often still taken seriously, I'm kind of thinking that you were lucky that you had that because in your home, comics weren't looked down at.
Yeah, I know, it's strange.
Yeah. But still you come, and your father comes from more like mainstream reading experience, and you said that you took comics seriously. What gave you that perspective to take comics more seriously than than mainstream? Because that's your style from the start.
What made me take...
Was there a moment that you... Because there are a lot of cartoonists who say that they read something and that kind of gave them a revelation, oh, you can do that with comics. Did you have that kind of moment? Or
I really did. So when I was kind of like, I didn't know what to do with myself as a teenager. Like, I'd always drawn comics as a kid, but then when I became a teenager and I started thinking about like what I was going to do, I knew I wanted to be involved in art somehow. And so I started thinking I was going to be a painter. And I tried that, and I learned very quickly I was not good for that. I shouldn't be doing that. So it really was like, oh, I should get back into drawing comics, because all the paintings I was doing were narrative. Like, they all like had words in them, or I was trying to portray some kind of story. And I think that I did that because I internalized that. Like, art to me growing up always told a story. And I was trying to do that with my paintings, and I remember being chastised for that from a teacher at my school. He said, paintings with, a painting can't have words. If it has words, it's a sign, or whatever, And that was the thing that I was like, oh, I'm just a sign painter or something. But around that time, the Harvey Pekar documentary came out. And then the R. Crumb documentary, like, I discovered that around the same time, too. Because I used to just go to work and then come home and go to Blockbuster Video and just, like, pick a different, movie to get, like, every day. And I just went through everything. And then finally I got to those two movies, and that was the lightning bolt for me, where I was just like I felt like a weirdo outsider anyway. So then, like, seeing that there was like Crumb was like somebody who was a total weirdo outsider, and that he was doing work that was very personal, and it, he wasn't even thinking about going mainstream or anything. It was just like he was just doing things that were meaningful to him. That was huge for me. And like, I immediately got a sketchbook and then started trying to draw like him. And, I was just talking to Charlie about this. Like, that's the doorway that I came in to comics through. So you can still see it in my work. Like, it was so huge for me, like his work and his drawings and stuff. So.
Did you also feel a sympathy in the documentary? We see how the oldest brother was, dragooning everybody into a cartooning collective.
Yeah.
Did you have that sympathy with that? It seems like from the way you reflect your upbringing, all the brothers or all the kids were drawing all the time.
They all drew comics. Yeah, I related to it in like a lot of ways. It was very similar to me, and there's a lot of mental illness in my family as well and stuff. So I don't know. It's just like it was just like a really powerful thing seeing that film. I'll never forget it. So
yeah. I remember when it came out, I was in I think early in grad school, about 15 years older than you, or 13 years older than you, and it was just oh, okay, yeah, he's the one who got out.
Yeah, exactly.
The rest of the family is the ones that couldn't escape. But did that answer your question?
Certainly.
Go. One audience member asks, you mentioned stealing time and the idea of needing time to draw. You also said you took 100 pages out of the Joseph Smith book. Is there a temptation to use those pages for another book?
Joseph Smith in years.
Yeah, I only very, very briefly thought about like just publishing like a mini comic of that stuff. But then it's just like, I don't want to water down. Like, this is what it is. Like, this is my story, and I don't need to release any more content from that stuff. I just let it go. So. I didn't even feel bad about it.
An older guest asked, do you have a time machine? Because Fonte Bukowski was me in my 30s. I was going to ask how many of us were the influence for that character, but how many of us were the influence for that character?
My question is, do people tell you that often?
I get that all the time. That book is translated, like, I can't even tell you how many translations there are, 10 maybe. Like, in fact, I just got money for like a Turkish edition of that book. So apparently that character is something that is on every continent. Like, everybody can relate to that for some reason. And I was really just making fun of a writer and a poet that I knew in Denver that I thought were really obnoxious and took themselves very seriously. That's all it was, but I must have like really hit on something with that. Yeah, that book is really the gift that keeps giving. I don't know why.
Of course, because this is all about content, ever think of more Bukowski stories? Or has it really played itself out as far as
I don't even think I could write like that anymore.
Good.
I was funnier back then.
Yeah, how have you changed? I mean, we talk about some of the development artistically, but how do you see yourself changing or in progress?
I don't have, when I did that book in the earlier comics I did, I had more of like a punk irreverent spirit towards comics, where I was just like, I wanted attention, but my work didn't merit attention, so I felt like I'm going to get attention by just being like really crass and like really funny and just make fun of everybody and stuff. I just don't, that's just not who I am anymore.
That's a time-honored tradition in the art world. I mean, you look at the early stuff from Klaus and Bag and everybody else, and it was making that mark or trying to make a stand before the art really held itself up.
It's true,
You know, and they all managed to work out pretty well as careers go. But tell me about Denver. I asked because I read On the Road amazingly for the first time a couple of weeks ago. I know.
Really? Wow.
It's just because I kept getting turned off by it over the course of my life, and I finally sat down. It seems that Denver plays into your mind a little bit. Can you talk about the city and whether there are those resonances back to Kerouac?
Well, when I moved to Denver, it wasn't a hip place to live. I remember when I lived in Denver and I'd come do comic conventions and people would ask, like, where are you from? I'd say Denver, and they didn't know even what state that was in. So it was like a really cheap, affordable place to live, like just like kind of lost in time. They still had all their old buildings and everything. And the beatnik thing is really big there. Like they really push that. Like you'll see that stuff around, and everywhere you go, it's like, oh, that's a hotel that Allen Ginsberg used to live in and worked in and stuff. And and I also, like, as a young man, went through my like beatnik phase. I read all of that stuff. I still like Kerouac a lot. I read a lot.
I put it off to my 50s. So I'm with the long hair and everything. It's all it's a weird midlife crisis, but I'll take it. Sorry, go on.
And I read like all the Charles Bukowski books and everything. Like that's sort of a phase that you go through, and it's a good gateway into other stuff. But yeah, Denver was like a really interesting, beautiful place to live as a cartoonist. And what I liked about it was that it was this kind of city where you could move there and just like have start puppet shows on your porch, and then everybody would know about you as the puppeteer. And I moved there and I just like announced myself as like, I'm a cartoonist, even though I hadn't done anything. And then I became like the town cartoonist. Like I got a job in the newspaper and stuff, and it was great. Like I was so easy to establish myself or like reinvent myself there. And when I go back now, it's completely different. Yeah, it's like it's gone basically, the stuff that I remembered about it.
How do you arrive at the different illustration styles you do?
You just try and find what suits the story that you're working on. So, for example, when I'm doing something like this is drawn in, very small and very loose, because I was thinking like I want it to look almost like a diary or something, like just like something very personal and like quickly done. And so it's pretty messy compared to other stuff I've done. And this is like drawn just more simply, and also like in a sketchbook, because I wanted to. I have a theory about like humor work. Like if it's something that's funny, it should be simple and like loose. I think like the funniest comics that I can think of are drawn, besides a few things, are drawn like very like loose. Like Jules Pfeiffer, for example, or something. It's like humor work. It should be like as quick as a joke is told to you or something, And then for something more serious, I wanted you to like linger on this book more, so I tried my best to put more into the illustrations on every page and stuff. So,
since you spoke about literature and writers, what have you gotten out of literature for your comics?
Well, like Fonte Bukowski, for example, it just gave me like a lot of people to make fun of, like a lot of like literary types to make fun of. For my stories, though, like I still do read Jack Kerouac, and actually. Kerouac's work does inspire me to write comics, because speaking of rhythm, like he has a really good rhythm to his writing that translates to comics very well for some reason. So when I read his writing, it does touch me and get me kind of like inspired to do my own writing, But other things, I'm really into this author named Willa Cather. Who, like, to me is like the great American writer. She's like a writer of the prairies. She did a book called My Antonia, which is really fantastic, but all of her books are really great. And reading her work makes me want to push myself in the stories that I tell and twist things from my own life into something almost unidentifiable as autobiography, I don't know. I could just go on.
Yeah, Death Comes for the Archbishop is one of my all-time faves.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
She's fantastic.
Yeah. Wonderful.
You, with the mask down. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the way you decided to characterize Joseph Smith, because he does come across to me like humorous at certain points, where he's kind of like this pathetic character that like almost is like an artist, where he's trying to get people to believe in him and what he has to offer.
I think there's just like moments of that, like but I feel like that's sort of realistic, where a human being would have dimensions like that, but are you talking about like the physical way that I portrayed him, or just the way that he's portrayed as a character?
I guess just certain moments to get, like, because I'm really like interested in this trope that I feel like comes a lot in cartooning specifically, where like just this like almost like Fantae Bukowski is like this pathetic but like charming in that. I kind of sensed like notes of that with Joseph Smith, where like
that's interesting. That must have come just from doing that, like knowing how to do that and knowing how that. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't do that on purpose though. It would have just been like in moments that I would have learned about from his life. That's just kind of how it happened or something, in this.
But I like the idea that it's actually secretly an autobiography, that Joseph Smith fits into your
sure.
memoiristic mode. You just didn't
followers.
realize it. Yep.
They ask, can you share more about your process for doing the research for Joseph Smith? How you read through the existing literature, picking out the arguments and parts of the narrative that you wanted to crack? And also, were there times when you went back to change things, not just redraw panels?
It happened all the time. I'd be working on it. Like my research process, a lot of it was, besides just like doing a lot of traveling to historic sites to take photos and things like that, I did just a lot of cross-referencing, where I just had like a giant stack of books, and I would read the section that I needed for whatever I was working on from each book, and then like measure them against each other to find out like which one had details in it that the other ones didn't, just so I could get like a fuller picture of something. That was like mostly how it was done.
Did you ever have the revisionist moment? In From Hell, Eddie Campbell tells a story that he had some script from Alan Moore where the murderer is walking across London Bridge, which apparently wasn't built for another 2 or 3 years. Yeah. So he just drew the panel of him like walking in midair, saying, "Here, Alan, go do your research."
I wonder if I might have, but what that jogs in my memory the most is the very first book that I did was about Abraham Lincoln, and I remember that I drew doorknobs, like twisty doorknobs. Yeah. And at a certain point, I realized that those didn't even exist back then. So I had to go through like all the pages of art and like paste on a new doorknob on all of them.
Further question?
They ask, what motivates you to self-publish some projects?
Just to keep myself busy and just to get quick income, honestly. Like it's, just put some small idea out there that I know that is probably best to just do and directly send it to people. So,
and you still prefer, having a print pamphlet that's still a format that gets you?
Yeah, absolutely. Over what, like digital or something?
When I got the PDF for Maple Terrors, I had a thing that said online only at the end. I'm like, I hope to God this is not only online, that there's a print version of. So when I got here and they gave me a copy, I was like, oh, thank God, there's an actual physical comic book.
That is first and foremost is the print edition of it, because we're creating like an art object, and that's like one of the most important things. I can't imagine how unsatisfying that would be to work so long on a graphic novel and then just like have it be on a PDF that people can. Yeah, that's a bummer.
So you.
Oh, I had a question about you. I don't know the specifics, but you were at Ohio State University for a number of years, and I was wondering about how being in and out of academia kind of affected your work.
Oh, well, I didn't teach there. I was just there hanging out all the time.
That can affect your work too.
Yeah, I met my wife there. She worked for the Billy Ireland cartoon library. I would go there all the time and just check out specific artists' original artwork, and then just sit in there and pour over that stuff.
Who did you plots over the most?
Harold Gray. They had a really good collection of Little Orphan Annie stuff there.
I was going to say that there's sort of a vibe in the back of As a Cartoonist with the thin sort of line and the placing of the blacks, but I'm not an artist, so cool.
Following up on that, collecting seems to be an important part of your life, and I always enjoy it when you share some of the things that you find exciting. Do you still have time to do that with all the work you did?
Sort of. I don't do it as much anymore.
Right.
But yeah, I have a pretty good collection of stuff.
Thanks for sharing.
I have a lot of books. Yeah, I like sharing. I feel like it's my duty as a cartoonist is to share other artists' work, particularly like historic comic work, because in a way, it's like just helping keep that stuff alive. So one of the things I like to self-publish are like collections of like I did like one on Claire Briggs and then one on H.T. Webster and stuff, just to keep these things out there and keep people looking at them or something.
Just so you know, it works, because sometimes they'll see some stuff that I'm unaware of. They'll see it and then they'll go on and buy it. So thanks.
Oh, great. Yeah, you're welcome.
Are you going to pull the Eddie Campbell route and start doing, full prose books with illustration on history?
I wish I could do that. He's great. I don't know.
Yeah. Getting back to festivals after a couple of years of pandemia, how's it changed for you coming to events like this?
I don't think it's really changed. It's just fun to be back and seeing people and talking to people again. So,
did you get more work done during pandemic?
Yes, I did. I finished this book during the pandemic, so yeah, it was good for me.
Well, cartoonists say that actually.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Yeah, pretty much all of them said nothing really changed.
Yeah, exactly.
I wasn't going out anyway. I was a shut-in, and I just kept cartooning. But
Lockdown is our lifestyle.
Yeah.
The rest of the world knew finally. Do you see yourself doing a long form again, and maybe not as long form as Joseph Smith? But
yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Yeah. And you're getting back to making a podcast of your own.
Yeah, I will eventually. I just, what happens is that I would schedule like a conversation with another cartoonist for my YouTube channel, and then my son would bring home something from daycare and get us all sick, and then I'd have to cancel, and that just happened too many times in a row that I was just like, all right, let me just take a break on this until my son is not getting sick all the time.
Yeah. I do want to say, when it comes to your son and the nature of making autobiography with the idea that this is how he's going to learn about his dad, that makes a huge presumption that your son is going to be interested in your comics.
That's true.
Yeah, so I wouldn't guarantee
eventually
that.
Eventually will,
maybe
right?
Just, Dad, I'm not really interested in. Yeah.
What about Jack Kirby's kids? Do they care about their dad?
I won't make a comment about what they cared or didn't care about, but yeah, I no idea. I know a couple of artists who have told me their families zero interest whatsoever in their work. But.
Yeah.
I think when you spoke about, again, books literature, you really like some of them, like Kerouac, but it seems to me that you wouldn't do an adaptation because, going through comic shops and so on, it seems that there are more and more adaptations of this or that, but you seem to be very keen on doing original stories.
Yeah. Well, that's tricky doing that because not every book needs it. It's I've talked to other cartoonists about this, but I feel like I would only do that if I felt like my art could enhance it somehow, if I could make it something totally different than what it is. But otherwise, I've seen some that were just like, you didn't make this a better book. Like, it's actually better if somebody just reads the book than this graphic novel based on it,
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed that it seems to get more and more common to do adaptations instead of original work, because it's not bringing anything new to the world.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the good thing about it is that maybe it'll get people inspired to read the original, hopefully. Maybe, probably not, though.
I'm not so sure about you and that.
Yeah. Well.
And artists you're excited to see while you're here?
Oh, I saw them all. Kim Deitch, of course, was great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was here. And Drew Friedman.
I don't know if you've read Drew's or seen Drew's History of the Underground's book. Besides Crumb, do you see yourself fitting or drawing influences from some of the the key figures from there?
Yeah. Especially, this is an artist named Michael McMillan. Have you heard of his work?
I don't recall now.
He's one of the greatest of the underground cartoons. He only did a little bit of work, a lot of stuff for like Arcade, and he did his own comic book, like one issue. He's one of the greats, and Drew put him in that book. And I didn't even know what he looked like until I saw that,
That was part of recording with Drew about that was going into how much work went into getting photo reference for some of these people, including one guy who basically wears a paper bag over his head and
really?
refuses to be seen, but
Nice.
ended up getting something for him. So I'm sure there'll be more, tributes to current era comics.
Yeah.
Gets around to that. But
what's your process for beginning a book? Do you start with a written notes or a script, or?
Yeah, I have a composition notebook that I'll start just kind of sketching ideas out in. If I
With words? Or?
Yeah, with words, but it's like so loose, and like the drawings themselves, like and nobody would understand what's going on except for me, because it's just like mostly like here's a circle, and the circle is a person or something, a particular person, or so I just start out very loosely like that, just like getting ideas down on paper, and then you refine that over the course of putting together a graphic novel.
Do you trace sketches?
No, I don't do that. I'm more immediate about like when I get to the actual page, I'll just do it and not even get too precious about it,
Yeah.
did you have to learn that?
Yes, so, I think I might have talked to you about this before, but it was the first trip I took to Angoulême changed my style a lot, because I had been I'd been trying so hard to draw in a certain way, and it was painful. Like it was like I was getting kind of stiff. And then when I went to France and I saw what the cartoonists they were doing and how they were just loose and everything looked like they were just having fun, I realized like that's more natural to me to do it like that. And it helped me figure out that like that's what my style is supposed to look like. That's how it's supposed to come out. So that changed me. And then I was like on the plane on the way home, just like practicing my new way of doing things.
Turbulence be damned.
Yeah, right. This was in 2015.
Oh, wow. I thought it would have been earlier.
Yeah, no. I mean, I look at the stuff before that, and it's like painful to look at. Very, very tight.
As a cartoonist, you have to part with the guy with the top hat and microaggressions and triggering and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself filtering what you put out in a book? Do you have any anxiety about backlash or anything?
A lot of cartoonists do. Honestly, I don't even think about that stuff. I've never. Yeah, I think when I did that story, that was because I was about being at CCS, the Center for Cartoon Studies, and that was like a wake up call to me. Like just being, it was like all these new students who had their own opinions about art and stuff like that. I'd never been faced with that before. So that's why that story was like that, because I was just like, oh, what's going on? Like, oh, okay. But like I'm not going to draw anything really offensive or horrible or anything anyway, so I don't even, I hope not. Jeez. It's probably not going to age well.
Yeah, nobody on my show has ever been canceled, sort of, as far as I can tell. I've dodged a few bullets with it, but, we'll keep our fingers crossed everything works out okay. But yeah, that sense of, I guess, being around university towns and that sort of arts community that revolves around those sorts of things. You had CCS, Columbus, and now Charleston.
Yeah.
How important is place like that for what you do? Not necessarily that you're making comics about those places, but
the only way that ever factors into my comics is that if those places like allow me the time to work and the peace to work. So like when I was at CCS, I lived in the hostel there for a year, and man, it was just like I got sick all the time. It was just it was like really noisy and like kind of a dreary. Anybody who's been to CCS, I think Robin Chapman, you've been, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, yeah, it can be a little difficult to work there. For me, it was anyway. And then Columbus, like I lived alone in an apartment and stuff, and that was all right, a little depressing too. So I feel like now, like being in South Carolina, it's like there's just nothing going on outside my door. I feel totally fine to just like lock myself in there and just draw. And it's been helpful for that. But I don't, I'm not doing any Southern comics or anything. Yeah. So,
if you were starting out as a cartoonist now, given the work you've done with younger cartoonists, do you think you'd be radically different? Do you think about yourself in terms of, I happen to hit at this right time?
Yeah, I haven't really, but I guess maybe I did. I don't know. I don't know if I would have been any different or anything,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Posting on Instagram instead of
I would have had
doing
TikTok.
Yeah. Dancing cartoonists.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be a thing.
Yeah.
Are you still interested in doing a book about Brigham Young?
Not anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's exhausting to think about doing
Always a good sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did talk about it back then. You were in the
same place?
Just it would make natural sense to follow, post Joseph Smith, but
I don't know if it would anymore.
It seemed like it would make sense, but I did not want to do this.
Yeah,
so,
I need some time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And time to think about being larger and being a dad and
And that's a totally different story than that one. That's a more brutal story. And a lot of ugly things to portray and stuff. So I don't even know. It would be such a hard thing to draw and not get in trouble for. Yeah. So.
And did creating the book on Joseph Smith change your it improved your understanding of the church and its history, but it changed your relationship at all, or your
no, it didn't.
In relation to it?
It really didn't. It made me how it did was that it made me more comfortable in the life that I have now.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking about like what I should have been doing maybe or something, So that's how it changed me, but I feel the same as I'm like more relieved, but I'm not,
I did the right thing. Or,
yeah. I'm not I don't have anxiety about it.
They ask, how do you select the subject of your biographies?
It's just stuff that, it's like it's the same question, the same answer. It's like things that just like are inspiring to you that you feel like would be interesting enough for you to devote the next possibly 4 or 5 years on or something, however long it takes. Luckily, I don't think mine really take that long, but yeah, you just whatever you think will hold your attention for that long.
With the closing in on 40, and of course, the end of your life, as you know. I know, but only because when I first sat down with Seth, it was about having to plan out what time he had left and how many comics he had. You're not quite in that boat yet, but I do want to plant that seed that you start worrying about.
That is so grim.
Yeah, I got 4 years on this book, and then is that the sort of thing you contemplate at all in terms of say legacy?
I don't do that yet, but I'm sure I will.
Give it a year. You're just about there.
I might be. Yeah, that's terrible to think about.
No, it should be inspiring.
Really? Like I can't do all the stuff I want to do.
That's living, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
Last questions? Anyone?
Last one I'm going to do. Not a question, but I have a friend named Jody Young from Binghamton who claims to be a descendant of Brigham Young, but he's not a Mormon because Young's first wife was not a Mormon.
Yeah, well, he probably is. I mean, he probably is a descendant. That's a big family tree, so.
Much like your own. My wife asked, actually, he mentions all of these siblings stay in touch with family?
Not really. It's a weird thing where like everybody, so when you have 9 kids, you get one of every kind. And we just don't really pay, like there's like a Facebook message group just in case there's like an emergency somewhere with somebody, but like, no, we're all like totally different people that don't even interact with each other. It's kind of a weird, I don't even feel bad about it. Like we had like a...
I haven't seen my family in 6 years.
Yeah,
so,
no.
I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess I owe it to them, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't even know what they
Any
do.
response to your autobiographical work at all? Or
No, they don't read my comics, so...
Again, I'm telling you, I wouldn't presume your kid's going to either.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
But if no one has further questions, I want to thank Noah for coming. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. And
thank you.
And if you haven't picked up these books, go downstairs. They've got everything on 18th Street at the exhibit hall. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And that was Noah Van Sciver. Go check out his new comic from Uncivilized Books, Maple Terrace, along with his recent books, As a Cartoonist and Joseph Smith and the Mormons, from Fantagraphics and Abrams, respectively, as well as some of his earlier work. And like I said, One Dirty Tree, it's a really strong exploration of autobiographical territory and sets the groundwork for what Maple Terrace ultimately the story that Maple Terrace begins to tell. Anyway, Noah is on Instagram as Noah VS Comics, which I'll
give you a link for in the show notes and episode notes. But his site, nvansciver.wordpress.com, hasn't been updated much lately. His YouTube channel has a whole bunch of great cartoonist podcasts that we talked about, although, again, he's holding off on getting that going again until his kid stops becoming a human petri dish. But I'll put a link to all of that, as well as his Patreon, Noah Van Sciver, all one word, again, in the show and episode notes here. And thanks again to Bill Cardelopoulos and the whole Mocha team for putting the programming together and making the whole thing run so smoothly. I had a really great time at the event, and after we finished this panel, I had some really fun conversations with audience members, like Liz York, who ended up sending me that card of her drawing of the panel. And then I got to head over to the exhibit floor and meet up with lots of comics pals, and, well, it was really just great sort of getting back to the old days of what this sort of event was like. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. Let them know there is a show that comes out every week with really interesting conversations with fascinating writers, artists, cartoonists, musicians, and all sorts of creative folks. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or comic or music or piece of theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, a letter, email, DM if we're connected on Twitter or Instagram, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you go past that, you'll get cut off. Just call back and leave the second message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something neat that I'd love to share with the audience, but I'd never do that without the speaker's permission. So let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, this particular session cost me a couple of bucks, like I think $15 for the George Washington Bridge, another $20 for parking, gas, whatever. I work for a living. I get paid relatively well for the work that I do for a living, hence the lobbying in D.C. thing that I mentioned at the beginning. So if you've got money to spare, I hope you'll give it to people or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding platforms. And you can help people out that way with medical bills, rent, getting artistic projects off the ground, and all sorts of other things that people are looking for support for. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank every month, occasionally give to the Poor People's Campaign. Again, as part of that job I have, I make targeted election contributions to key representatives and senators. Your mileage may vary with that stuff, but there are a lot of different things you can do. You can donate to Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice Funds, Freedom Funds. What I mean is there are a lot of things you can do to try to help build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.